There is just one day left until an election that could decide New York's future on universal health care, rent regulation, charter schools, bail reform and more. No, it's not the race for the United States Senate or House of Representatives. It's the contest happening further down the ballot, for the state Senate. Contrary to the popular image of New York as an impenetrable wall of blue, Republicans have controlled the state Senate virtually uninterrupted for decades, frustrating attempts by progressives to pass a long wish list of legislation. But if Democrats flip just one seat, they can change that. The stakes have rarely been higher, according to both parties' rhetoric. Democrats say they need the blue wave to help them make Albany a bulwark against Washington and President Trump. Republicans say they need to fend off one-party rule in an increasingly liberal state, before conservative and upstate voters are forgotten forever. In the last frenzied, money-soaked days before Tuesday's election, here is where things stand. Following the money to 4 races, campaign finance filings give a pretty clear indication of which districts to watch. 8 candidates in 4 districts have been spending lavishly this year, with their campaigns funneling more than $6.3 million combined into the races. They are, James Gorin, a Democrat, and Carl Marcellino, the Republican incumbent, in Nassau and Suffolk counties on Long Island. Jeff Pravido, a Republican, and John Brooks, the Democratic incumbent. In Nassau and Suffolk counties, Tom Basile, a Republican, and James Skoufis, a Democrat, vying for an open seat in Orange County. Bob Antonacci, a Republican, and John Mannion, a Democrat, competing for an open seat in the Syracuse area. More than $11.6 million has arrived for state races in New York this cycle. From PACs and other outside groups, in addition to the candidates' money and contributions from the Democratic and Republican Senate campaign committees. More than $5.3 million of that outside money went to those 4 hotly contested races. Michael Malibin, the executive director of the Washington-based Campaign Finance Institute and a political science professor at the University at Albany, said the tight focus suggests that the Democrats believe they have a very narrow path to victory, through very specific districts. The election's on a knife's edge, Professor Malibin said. The 2 Long Island districts went for Hillary Clinton over Mr. Trump in 2016, but by just 3 points in both. The Syracuse district voted for Ms. Clinton by 5 points, the Orange County district chose Mr. Trump by 4. Republican donors are hedging their bets. Republicans, backed by moneyed interests such as real estate, have for years consistently outraised the Democrats. They still lead the Democrats in campaign funds this year, but the gap could have been larger, had it not been for some outside groups that seem to be sitting this year out. New Yorkers for a Balanced Albany, a well-funded PAC that supports charter schools, donated close to $7 million to Republicans in 2016, with nearly $6.6 million already infused by the end of October. But this year, as of the same time, the group had spent only $1.2 million. Some traditional Republican donors have also started giving to Democrats, perhaps to make sure they are in the good graces of the party that comes out on top. For example, the Real Estate Board PAC, which gave more than $260,000 to the Senate Republican Campaign Committee in 2016, had given them only $120,000 this year, as of the most recent filing. And it has donated $95,000 to the Democrats Committee, after giving nothing in 2016. Scott Reif, a spokesman for the Senate Republicans, dismissed the lower spending totals, pointing to other groups that have ramped up their spending, such as Balance New York, a PAC funded by real estate, that had spent $1.8 million as of November 1. Voters are feeling the blitz. The flood of campaign cash has meant that voters in competitive districts are seeing a torrent of television and digital advertisements, mailers and paid canvassers. Mr. Gorin said he had opened 4 campaign offices across the district, hired twice as many staff members and was flush enough to be able to reimburse the expenses of a squadron of volunteers 20 to 25 times larger than in his last unsuccessful run in 2016. In the Senate district near Syracuse area seat, which falls within the media market for 3 competitive congressional races, The television waves are completely soaked up with negative ads, said Ian Phillips, the campaign manager for Mr. Mannion, the Democrat, so much so that their team decided to run a spoof of an attack ad on Mr. Mannion. In Nassau County, where Anna Kaplan, a Democrat, is challenging the Republican incumbent, Elaine Phillips, cell phones light up with texts from the campaigns, and social media is awash with ads. Steve Tutino, who was eating lunch at a cafe near the Mineola train station, said he had been surprised to see that canvassers for Ms. Phillips had come to his door. They left flyers, which hasn't happened in years, Mr. Tutino, 57, said. Last-minute shenanigans are afoot amid much national conversation about the need for more civility in politics. Candidates on both sides have accused their opponents of dirty tricks. Voters in the Syracuse race recently received a mailer featuring Mr. Mannion posing with Mayor Bill de Blasio, alongside a warning about how Mr. Mannion supported the far-left, radical NYC agenda. But Mr. Mannion has never met the mayor. According to his aides, someone had pasted the mayor's head onto a photograph of Mr. Mannion with his campaign manager. On a lighter note, Mr. Gorin was also on the end of some unflattering Photoshop attention. His head was pasted onto that of Sacha Baron Cohen's satirical Borat character. In a Republican-held district in the Hudson Valley, the incumbent, Senator Terrence Murphy, accused his Democratic opponent, Peter Harcum, of sending paid protesters to his office and installing a camera to spy on the office. Mr. Harcum said the camera was pointed at a sign for his own campaign to make sure that no supporters of Mr. Murphy vandalized it. What does it all mean? The short answer, a lot. If it goes Democratic, all three branches would be Democratic, Professor Mulligan said of the Senate. It would have major consequences. Indeed, the Senate is the Republicans' last stronghold in state government. As New York City Democrats dominate the Assembly and voters have recently elected a string of Democratic governors. If the Senate also lands in Democratic hands, the Republicans will be virtually powerless to stop legislation that progressives have been demanding for years. The potential implications have energized Democrats not only in New York but across the country. As liberal states have sought to counteract some of Mr. Trump's policies on the federal level, Mr. Gorin's campaign has received more than 4,600 individual contributions since September, compared to fewer than 50 for Mr. Marcellino. Only about a fourth of Mr. Gorin's contributions came from New York. What it's telling you is that there are people out there who recognize that this is potentially of national significance, Professor Mulligan said.